Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Matteo Esposito's play, Sorting It Out. So I'd said this in my video about his play Moonchild, but Matteo had contacted me, it's actually about 2 months ago, so I really dropped the ball on actually getting around to watching these videos or watching these read-throughs of the plays and creating videos about them. But he had asked me to take a look at his work and talk about it on the channel. So, Sorting It Out is another piece of disability theater, in much the same way that Moonchild is, but I actually think that Sorting It Out is a much more sophisticated piece of theater. I think it's a much more sophisticated play than Moonchild. Moonchild is a very uplifting play. It's very, very positive. It's very, very supportive of people with disabilities, particularly people with autism. It's also a very didactic play. A lot of the dialogue is dedicated to the moon just giving Harry these very uplifting messages. Sorting It Out is more complicated, and I think that's really, really good. I think it's a much more dramatically engaging play, in part because we get a lot more actual action. It's dialogue. A lot of it is dialogue, obviously, because it's a play, but we get more stuff than actually happens in Sorting It Out. So, Sorting It Out opens with Ed and his father, Frank. And they're leaving the doctor's office. Ed may have some kind of condition. We don't yet know what it is. He's got a 50-50 shot, but the final test results are not in yet. Ed is obviously concerned about this. Frank is concerned about this. But on the way home, Frank has them stop off at his friend Nick's house. Nick and his homemaker. Nick and his homemaker Bob prepare some coffee, some cookies, etc., just to be hospitable. And then when Frank and Ed arrive, basically Ed is kind of a dick. He's very impatient. He finds Nick. He finds Nick very rude, even though Nick is actually not doing anything especially problematic. And Ed, as Nick does these various things to deal with the anxiety brought on by having a new person in his space and by Ed's rudeness, Ed becomes increasingly rude, increasingly hostile, increasingly insulting. At one point, for instance, Nick takes out a string that he starts playing with, starts twirling. In the autism community, this is called stimming or self-stimulation. Basically, it's a technique for centering oneself, I guess, is a way of putting it. It's a technique for dealing with stimuli that threaten to overwhelm. And so Nick starts doing this. Ed takes offense to this, and things escalate. Nick is trying to be very kind. Nick and Bob and Frank are all trying to get Ed to stop being a dick. They're trying to get Ed to understand that Nick, because of Nick's autism, there are things he cannot do, there are things he requires help with, etc., etc., and Ed is just unwilling to accept this. He's finally incredibly insulting to Nick, and which triggers Nick, and he begins what's called head banging, which is repeatedly striking himself in the face, in the head, etc., etc. And in this flailing motion, he accidentally hits Ed. Ed takes offense to this, and he goes to attack Nick, at which point Frank grabs Ed to restrain him. Bob grabs Nick to try and calm Nick down, to try and sort of bring him back. And then that sort of moment of peak conflict is kind of diffused when Ed's phone rings, and it's the doctor's office. And we learn that he's been diagnosed with very severe multiple sclerosis, which is a debilitating degenerative disease that can cause severe physical pain. It can make it difficult to walk, difficult to function, etc., etc. It can create neurological damage, and so on and so on. In the next scene, I think it's 6 months later, something like that, and Ed shows up at Nick's house, now reliant on a walker, and Ed comes in and essentially says, "Listen, I'm really sorry for the way I acted when I was here before. It was completely inappropriate. I didn't really understand, but now I have a sense of what it actually means to be a person with a disability and how difficult it is." And Nick tells him, well, so Ed also brings a peace offering, this very nice gesture. He brings Nick a blue string, blue being the color, or one of the colors for autism awareness, and the string being what Nick uses for stimming. And Nick basically says to Ed, there was a long time in my life where I felt helpless, I felt hopeless, I felt that nobody cared about me. And then I met Bob, the homemaker, the guy who helps Nick with daily chores and things like that. And Nick basically says, because Bob was compassionate, because he was kind, because he was supportive, that helped me find peace with myself and start to find pride in myself. And Nick basically tells Ed, if you ever need somebody to be kind, to be supportive, to be a friend, I'll be there for you. So it's a great ending to the play. And I think the thing that really strikes me about this play that I really like, and that I think, again, makes it more complex and more interesting as a play than Moonchild is the character of Ed. Because Ed is... So, again, we know from the beginning that Ed possibly has some kind of health condition. We don't know what it is, but I think, for me at least, that memory, that awareness of that was not central to how I was seeing his character throughout much of the play, because Ed is so intolerant, he's so quick to anger, he's so just rude to Nick. And so he's a villain in that sense, because he's clearly the antagonist of Nick. But once we find out that he's got severe multiple sclerosis, it puts a different spin on that relationship, because we realized that Ed was externalizing his anxieties. His fear, his concern, his worry about losing control of his body, losing the ability to think the way he has always thought, the ability to care for himself, etc., etc., that anxiety, that fear of that loss is what drives him to be an asshole to Nick. Like, because Nick is a person living with disabilities, that's the sort of existential terror that that Ed is facing. And he lashes out at Nick because Nick represents what Ed is terrified of becoming. And so, again, he's an interesting character. It's hard to say that he's really fully redeemed at the end of the play, but he definitely goes a long way toward being redeemed. He definitely... I mean, again, there's a sort of walk a mile in the other person's shoes element to this, which I don't think is necessarily terrible. It would obviously have been a much pleasanter situation if Ed could have said from the beginning, okay, I recognize that this is a person with autism, and I'm going to not be a dick to them. But that idea of coming to see other people as legitimate people, as real, proper people, regardless of issues like disability, issues like gender, race, ethnicity, age, whatever it is. I mean, it's an excellent message.